Hello, Will. Thank you so much for joining me on my show on the Emil Barna podcast. I'm really excited to get this going and exploring a little bit more about what you do with the performing arts and how you're able to support people, especially during this really difficult time that we're currently finding ourselves in. So you've got quite the story. You've got quite the way of providing help to people in the performing industries, because you've got your own experience in the performing arts as well. So I think that's what's really fascinating for me. But I'm not gonna give too much away. I'll get you, for those who haven't heard of you, I'll get you to give a bit of a breakdown around what it is you do, who you are, where you're from, all that sort of stuff. So feel free to fill in the gaps, and we'll go from there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. This is such an amazing opportunity, by the way. So my name's Will. I am a qualified counsellor and a life coach, and I created a mental health service here in Melbourne that specifically focuses on the needs of actors, singers and dancers. Much of that came from my own lived experience of being a music theatre performer. I was a music theatre actor for 20 years, both here in Australia and abroad. And throughout that journey, I had lots of struggles with my own mental health, challenges with depression, challenges with anxiety, a lot of challenges with imposter syndrome. And so in order to be able to kind of continue in my career, I needed a lot of psychological support, but I always felt as though there wasn't a support available that was specifically tailored to artists. And so when I retired from performing, I went to ACAP. I got my Bachelor of Counselling and Coaching, and I moved to Melbourne and created this service that helps and empowers creative people.
As you discussed that, this is really cool, because I had an interview with a concert pianist and a clinical psychologist not too long ago, Anastasia Chronis, and she was during that interview, she mentioned that it's a pity that people in the performing arts, or people, musicians and that sort of stuff, they don't have any tailored type of psychologist that caters to their particular struggles. I mean, we have occupational psychologists, we have clinical psychologists, we have organizational psychologists, but then we have people who are live a lot of their life in the creative arts that don't have people so specialize in that sort of field. So I find it really amazing that you're able to kind of tap into that type of support. And coming from your background, tell us a little bit about what kind of performances you were involved in, kind of in the 20 years that you were engaged with this sort of industry.
Sure. So I guess I was a late bloomer. I didn't start dancing until I was 18. It was something that I always wanted to do. But my parents, being migrant parents from a Latin American background, were very focused on education and financial security. So you can imagine when I said to them that I wanted to be a dancer, a singer and an actor, all hell broke loose. I guess they never thought that would turn into a career, a proper career. And even though I was a late bloomer and I only had 4 years of training, I worked very hard at trying to establish myself into the industry. And I did. I built a 20-year career on that small amount of professional development. That opened up so many doors for me. So I went overseas to Europe. I toured with AIDA. I toured with Saturday Night Fever. I toured with We Will Rock You. I came back to Australia. My first show here was 2010. It was West Side Story. And from then I went on to do Chorus Line, The King and I, The Lion King, Aladdin, In the Heights, King Kong. There's probably a few that I've missed. But I had a wonderful career as a performer. I also made it onto So You Think You Can Dance in 2010 as part of the top 20.
Oh, wow.
So lots of, achievements in terms of, my art. And I had a wonderful career, but it definitely wasn't without challenge. And that sort of brought me where I am today.
Well, I want to tap into that, but before I do, tell me a little bit. What was your favorite performance?
It's always a tough question, that one. I think when I was an emerging professional, probably my favorite musical to be in was Saturday Night Fever, because the costumes were amazing, the choreography was amazing. I'm old school, I'm retro, like Bee Gees music, 8 shows a week was heaven to me. I loved all the partnering in that show. It was disco. I mean, come on, how can you not have fun every night? So as an emerging professional, that was definitely like one of my highlights. Towards the tail end of my career, my most favorite show was my last one, which was In the Heights. They've just released a movie at the cinemas based on that show by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I loved it because it was about my culture, and it was about stories that I was familiar with, and it was about my native tongue. And I got to do that show, I think, with a lot more freedom than I did most of my other shows, because I didn't care about how I was perceived. I didn't care about making mistakes. I didn't care about being vulnerable. I was able to execute that with complete freedom. And because of that, it was my most enjoyable experience. And I bowed out taking my final bow as an artist at the Sydney Opera House. And
wow,
that is extraordinary.
That's huge. I would have thought that for it to be kind of part of is it a cultural, because for someone who doesn't have any kind of background in the performing arts, or doesn't have that much of an idea, that to me would have been one of the most daunting ones. If I were to kind of consider, I'm going back to my roots, and now I'm kind of going out in this area, that would have caused a lot of stress, a lot of build up. Did you experience any of that, or was it kind of?
I think for me, being in a show that was focused on the Latin American culture, it was about truth. It was about, storytelling, and it was about truth. And I think that's why it was so enjoyable, because I wasn't playing a character. I mean, I was in the show, but a lot of my, research, and a lot of my, a lot of what I dug into was my lived experience, being Latin American, growing up in a Latin American community in Australia, speaking Spanish at home. I could relate to so much of that. And I think because of that, it was a very, very authentic experience.
Yeah. And being able to bow out in such a prestigious institution, I don't know if, if you call it an institution, or a place like the Sydney Opera House. That's a pinnacle. That's huge.
It was extraordinary, and I cried like a baby for hours after the performance was done. I cried like a baby.
You mentioned, so you think you can dance. Man, when I was in my teens, that was like, I couldn't dance for anything. But I loved watching that show, or those shows where people would just do the most amazing things in terms of, pushing their body to the limits, and infusing dance culture with just being able to partner with somebody and just get down on the floor and shake their booty, so to speak. It was really cool to see that as a teenager, and I've never had those experiences of growing up in the performing arts, but I've always been that kind of creative mind and loving those expressions, which is why I think it's so unfortunate that the arts don't get as much recognition unless you're at the upper echelon of the performing arts. You're an actor, you're raking in millions. There's so many other disciplines that people have to kind of juggle just to become a performing artist. Did you find that that's a struggle that a lot of people do have when they're balancing the performing arts and another job and all this other stuff they're trying to do to just get into auditions and make it into the next best thing? What's been your experience?
Yeah, it's challenging because you're trying to survive, but you're also trying to thrive with this passion that you have. And it takes a while. It takes a while before that can be the dominant feature in your life. I've been fired from many jobs. I've hustled. I've done so many things in order to be able to continue, having this growth in the arts and this kind of exposure and whatnot. And yeah, it took time for that to be my career and for that to be the only thing that I do. I think it made me resilient. I think it built a lot of grit and determination in me. I had a goal, and I think starting late was a plus because there was this constant catch up that I needed to do. And so I didn't really have time to second guess myself, or, I needed to make my trajectory quite clear. And so I did that at all costs. I knew it's what I wanted to do with my life, and I knew it was going to take an incredible amount of hard work. And so I was willing to make sacrifices in order for that to happen.
But that speaks to anything that you want to kind of set your mind to when it comes to jumping on and doing something with such I say it requires a lot of discipline for you to have gotten there. Did you find that you had to discipline yourself more than you would if you weren't pushing forward to that artistic endeavor?
It's funny you asked that. I wasn't aware of my discipline, and I had it, but I just wasn't aware that what I was choosing to do, that my daily structure and my daily routine was actually quite disciplined. For me, it came quite natural to sort of get up in the morning and stretch. It came quite natural to run. It came quite natural to go and take dance classes. It came quite natural to research films and theatre shows and musicals. I didn't realize that was a discipline. I only kind of tapped into that now as a life coach and as a counsellor, when I help people structure their lives, that all these things that I did were very disciplined choices. I guess because I had such a passion for it, it felt organic. But yeah, I used to run, I used to stretch, I used to work on my flexibility, I used to work on my technique, even at home, even in the living room. It does take a lot of focus and a lot of concentration to master this skill that you have. And I don't know that I ever did master it, but I definitely worked constantly to continue to learn and grow.
I think that's huge. There's a guy that comes into my mind as you were speaking. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Jocko Willink, and he's an American military veteran or a Marine veteran. And his catchphrase, he's written a book about it, is discipline equals freedom. Wow. And what he mentioned is like, well, the more disciplined you are, the more free you are to do what it is that you would like to do. So say you discipline yourself to wake up a bit earlier in the morning. You have an extra amount of time in the morning where you can go and do what you want to do. You discipline yourself throughout the day. You know what's coming next. You know where you want to kind of move your life forward with. And when I hear you say it, well, this all kind of came pretty naturally to me because it was something I was super passionate about doing. You haven't thought about it, but you arranged your life in such a way that discipline came easy because it's something that you were super passionate about. And it's only, I guess, if I were to take a stab, it was only in retrospect that you were able to say, yeah, I was pretty disciplined. Or if somebody said, hey, that's really disciplined of you to do, then you would be like, oh, okay, I didn't think of it that way.
And that's when I became aware of it. As the more and more I started to work with creative people and the more and more that I work with creative youth, the more I started to realize that these things that I was doing, these natural choices that I was making, was very much shaped around structure and order and routine and discipline. Here's the catch, though. I could tap into it when it came by choice. So I struggled at dance school. I struggled in full time. I struggled learning, a tertiary degree in dance because it was enforced upon me what my discipline needed to be. And so I pushed back quite a bit, and I wouldn't turn up to classes, or I'd turn up late, or, you know, I was quite chaotic because I felt as though I didn't have a choice. I needed to listen to the rules, and I needed to abide by the rules. And so really I fell into this disciplined freedom when I felt that I was in charge of my own life and my own trajectory, and I could position myself where I needed to go and what I needed to be and do. So, you know, yeah, I guess if I felt that I needed to do it, if I was told that I needed to do it, I would push back. If I felt as though I had a choice and that I was the author that held the pen, then it came a lot more organically.
Ah, man, can I relate to that? I think this is really cool. It's really cool that you say that, because the first thing that comes to my mind is, you know, I'm not going to talk about my own experiences too much, but I think what I will say is the only time when an external pressure is placed on you to do something, and the only time you would ever do that, is if it lines up with your own internal pressure that you're putting on yourself. And if those two align, then you're like, okay, yeah, cool, I can smash this and move forward. One thing that I recall when I was doing my studies, in fact, I had a full-time job, and I was doing my master's in psychotherapy, and then I also had, you know, I was married, I had 2 children, and actually 1 child, and I think my wife was pregnant with my other child, and we had quite an active social life. And I just did all this sort of stuff as I could, you know. And then I remember sitting around and doing an exercise with I don't know, the group at the time. And I told them a few of the things that I was doing. They're like, wow, man, sounds like you've got so much on your plate. And I'm like, it's just what I do, you know. And it literally, the penny never dropped until someone else brought it up and said, you've got all this stuff that you're trying to manage. But it's like, it's just part of life, you know. For me, it was just part of life, what you do. And I can hear that in how you describe your experiences. It's like, you had a goal that you were aiming towards. You had that bullseye that you were striving, and everything else just kind of had to fall into place when you were passionate about getting where you wanted to be. At what point did you decide, okay, I need to change my trajectory from performing arts to the helping profession? Like, give us a bit of a rundown on that.
Yeah, so the last 2 shows before my run of In the Heights at the Opera House were The Lion King into Aladdin. And in The Lion King, I probably spent 17 years working as an ensemble dancer. And for The Lion King, I wanted to audition for the show as a singer. And so I worked really hard to get my voice to a place where I could audition as a singer, not a dancer. And I got the job. Much to my disbelief, 1 person left the contract. It was a cast change, and I got the job. And, you know, I didn't think that was going to be possible. You know, I considered myself a dancer, not even a dancer who could sing. But nonetheless, the work that I put in paid off, and I got offered a contract in the singing ensemble. Then from there, a few months into the run, I internally auditioned to take over a principal role, Banzai, which is one of the 3 hyenas. And I got it. I got offered the principal role in the show, and something happened in terms of I suddenly felt an incredible amount of pressure and an incredible amount of responsibility to have to be a principal role in a show and carry that every night. And so I ended up becoming my worst enemy. So, you know, I started a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of anxiety began, a lot of imposter syndrome began, a lot of self-doubt, and it crushed me. It broke me, to be honest with you. I think I was at the deepest pits of my despair on that contract. I would disappear after a show, and I would go home and I would go into a cocoon, and ruminate on everything that I felt had gone wrong, and everywhere where I had disappointed myself and disappointed the audience. And that became really, really overwhelming, and it got really dark. So I ended up having to reach out for some psychological support, and I met a psychologist who was an opera singer. And when I walked into the room and I could unpack to this person just how much my identity was tied into my voice, how much my worth was tied into my voice, and how much I needed my voice to do what I needed it to do, to get that understanding and that kind of empathy was life-changing. And so a part of me was like, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to be that person that can welcome someone into a room and go, I understand your journey. I don't know it completely, but I can empathize, and I can hold the space with you, and I can share the space with you, and I can share some of your pain and help support you and help you flourish. And so that got me curious about working in mental health. And the rest is history.
Oh, that's so powerful that this one person was able to create that atmosphere for you, where you were able to almost want to adopt that way of helping other people. Because, I mean, it often happens like that, doesn't it? When we're right in the pith of our despair, that things become a bit more lucid, so to speak. Would you say you are more passionate about helping others than you were about performing in the past?
Well, that's a really good question. Am I more passionate about it? I think it serves who I am today more. How do I explain this? There's a lot of pressure that comes with being in the arts, and there's a lot of pressure with doing what we do. And as I moved from The Lion King into Aladdin, I realized that the effort reward was no longer in balance. And so in Aladdin, the effort that it took to set foot on stage, the effort that it took to take over a principal role as an understudy, the effort that it took to be in that environment, and to show up on stage and give 100%, just wasn't the same. You know, it came at the cost of my well-being. It came at the cost of my mental health. And so what I've moved into now is an area of life that I'm passionate about, that supports my well-being and that supports my mental health. And that has made me, given me a lot more power to choose. And so, you know, I guess it's not that I'm more passionate about working in mental health. It's that it serves me more. It serves the person that I am today more than staying in the arts.
And it's a lot less physically strenuous, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, you know, I think people underestimate the effort and the toll that it takes on performers, you know, to do the thing that they love, to do their art.
Do you think it's because you had so much pressure in your previous discipline that having less, how do I put this, that you feel less pressure in your current discipline?
That I feel less pressure? I don't think I feel less pressure. I think I make smarter choices.
Okay. Tell us about that.
Choices. Well, because I think the art is this beast. It's this machine that you get on, and it's relentless, and it's challenging, and it's a roller coaster ride, and you've got to have thick skin, you know, in order to be able to go through it. And you know, you don't often feel as though you really have a say. You don't often feel as though you really have a voice. You're saying yes to every gig that comes along. You're saying yes to what the show expects of you. You're saying yes to the demands and yes to the gruel and yes to the sacrifices, because it's a competitive industry. You want to stay in it for as long as you possibly can. And you feel as though saying no comes at a consequence, like losing your job or getting a reputation where you are difficult to work with. So you end up being a yes man. And you say yes to a lot of things that you would normally say no to. And so I feel as though in this role that I have now, and this job that I have now, in the sector that I work in now, I have a voice. I am seen and I am heard, and I have the right to choose. And so when it gets too much, I can say stop, or I can press pause, and I can look after myself, and then I can step back in when I'm ready.
What does it take for someone to make it in the performing arts? Like, what are people looking for, generally speaking? I don't know if you can be general about it, but yeah.
Teamwork, collaboration, adaptability, resilience, grit, courage, perseverance, persistence. Like, there are so many values that are required for you to have a career as a performer. There are so many sacrifices as well. Like, you've really got to prioritize this job. I've missed out on births and funerals and weddings and celebrations, and I've missed out on travel. I've missed out on holidays. Like, I've missed out on so much because I had to be available to this machine. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot of commitment to be in the creative industries. So yeah, it's not an easy gig, and it can sometimes come at a cost if you don't know how to look after yourself while you're doing it.
You've made a few references now, it being a machine, the performing arts machine. How does this imagery come up? Because when I kind of hear you talk about it, I kind of see some cogs turning and like crushing people who aren't quick enough to kind of escape that, and then people dancing on the side of it, but always kind of looking back and watching this machine come closer and closer towards them. Well, what's your why do you use the word machine when it comes to describing this?
Because there's a big difference between art and industry. So art carries a sense of creative freedom, self-designed work, the ability to choose what you want to do and what you don't want to do. That's art. And I think that's why we go into the industry, because we love our art. We love our passion. We love to sing, dance, act, create. But industry is a very, very different thing. Industry is about showing up. Industry is about doing the job, executing the job responsibilities, the pressure, the duty. So industry and art are very, very different. And, like you look at people like Lady Gaga, and you look at people, like actors who go industry. And there's like Britney Spears and all of that sort of stuff. Like, the industry requires a lot from you. And you're, like I said, you're on this machine, and it feels like you have no control of it because someone else is deciding where you're going to be, what you're going to do. And for a lot of artists, you notice them, a lot of these big artists, you notice them, they'll start to divert, and they'll go to a place where they choose some different kinds of projects. Where they have a little bit more power and they have a little bit more say, and because the industry is consuming, it's very consuming, and it is also, you are very replaceable. If you don't want to do it, there's someone else who will, someone who will accept less money because they're dying for the opportunity. So I think that's why I refer to industry as a machine, because industry and art are very, very different things.
I guess that's why when you only have the pick when you become very, very well known or very successful. I remember there was a significant period of time where Leonardo DiCaprio just did no movies, from my recollection, and then he came back after a hiatus and would kind of churn one blockbuster after another, because he kind of liked the story more than anything else. When it comes to your experiences supporting people with a real passion of the art, and yet they're in this cog of industry, how do you approach that type of support, balancing the two?
Self-care. It's the only thing that you have control of is self-care. The beast is what it is. The machine is what it is. That's not going to change. It's your relationship to it, and how you prepare, your preparation and your reparation from being involved in it. Self-care is the greatest tool that any artist can have, because it's something that you can do, in order to be able to stay whole and stay well, regardless of how you're pushed and pulled and stretched. So a lot of the work that I do with creatives is around, establishing this solid self-care structure. What are the ways that you need to speak to yourself? What are the ways that you need to, look after your pillars, like your emotional health, your psychological health, your physical health, your spiritual health, what relationships are the ones that you need to invest in that will be constant and that will be there for you and will support you. Self-care and those self-care rituals and practices is the key to survival. It's the key to longevity. And so that's a lot of the work that I do is empowering people in an industry where they may not feel powerful, to take back some ownership, and put in place things that serve them and that serve their well-being.
Empowerment. So this is a big deal of building up any type of resilience and any type of self-esteem or self-confidence. Self-esteem has got a bit of a bad rap over the past generation or so, and but self-confidence in itself and self-regulation, which kind of translates to that discipline that we're kind of talking about. I think that those are pivotal when it comes to any type of movement towards becoming a better version of who you are. When you talk about self-care, what do you notice is the most useful, or what are the best takeaways of people? How can you support someone to take care of themselves when they're constantly putting themselves out there and facing rejection? Because I think there's a lesson here. We're all going to face rejection. People in the performing arts, they would face a lot of turn downs in any audition that they might have. How do you kind of buffer against that, and how do you build up that resilience moving forward?
Separating yourself from the art that you do. It's not who you are, it's what you do. There's a big difference. You are a person that sings, dances, and acts. You are a person that creates, and knowing that differentiation allows the human being to recover, and the human being to repair, and the human being to recalibrate, no matter how many knockbacks you get, no matter how many negative reviews you get, no matter how many times you get rejected. If you can look after the person, then that person stays powerful and can manage the rest. So things we look at, or things that I address in the room, are things like your self-talk, the kinds of conversations that you have with yourself. It is practices that allow you to be mindful, and to stay in the present moment, and to not get too caught up in the future or too caught up in the past. It is that self-regulation, to know how to manage triggers, to know how to manage, the unexpected. It's to work on having some solid support in your life, some constants, in an industry that is constantly changing and constantly chaotic, constantly asking you to adapt and constantly stretching you. Those anchors, any kind of anchor that you can develop, is going to be your best friend. And so basically we work at creating some kind of order in the midst of all of this chaos, because the creative journey is a chaotic journey. And so structure that allows you to, make the morning segment useful for yourself, make the evening segment useful for yourself, find time or breaks in the afternoon to recover and repair. That keeps you well. Keeps you
when someone gets really caught up in that negative self-talk, what is some kind of positive replacements that they could use that don't get to the heart of I guess I'm a failure would become a very overarching self-talk in the performing arts. Is that correct? Is that kind of right to say?
Yeah. So we would re-author that. I feel like I'm a failure. I'm having the thought that I'm a failure. Very different to saying I am a failure. Yeah. You've already sort of separated yourself from that challenge. You've already separated yourself from that problem. I use a lot of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. I use a lot of diffusion, which is separating yourself from the challenge, not seeing yourself as the problem, but rather seeing it as something that you need to overcome. In terms of replacing negative thinking with positive thinking, it's actually not about that. It's about accepting that those thoughts are there, noticing that they're there, and just working at not allowing them to have too much power over you. Seeing those thoughts, the greatest analogy that I use, and youth love this, is seeing those thoughts as sushi on a sushi plate. Going round and round, enticing you, but at the end of the day, you get to decide if you want to reach out and pick up the plate.
Is it difficult for people to get into that zone where they're so consumed by I am fill in the blank to I can see that this is what my mind is telling me?
Yes, it is difficult. From being the problem, thinking that you are the problem, to knowing that you are not, and that the problem is something that you are trying to overcome or clarify or understand, or reinterpret. Yes, it takes an incredible amount of work, and that's why we are therapists. That's why we are patient. That's why we provide the space for people to be able to develop that skill. It's not necessarily something that you're born with, but it is most certainly something that you can learn.
I keep going back to self-confidence as one of the things that I think these days, it's a tricky one. Self-confidence is a really tricky one because it it pairs with esteem. It also pairs with self-regulation and self-control. And often these days, we can be highly insightful as to who we are, what we're all about, what our triggers are, and the rest of that. And on the other hand, when it comes to building up that regulation, that sense of control over our situations without being kind of swallowed up by them, we may lack the capacity to really invest ourselves to kind of move forward into those regulating behaviors because of it may not be something that we've been taught or valued along the way. One good way of kind of displaying that is, there was a book I read a while back written by a social psychologist called Roy Baumeister, and he teamed up with a science writer and they kind of looked at the willpower research out there in terms of how do you build willpower and self-regulation and self-control. And what they found was back in the Victorian era, in say the early 1900s, late 1800s, around those sorts of times, self-regulation was all the thing that anyone talked about. You know, it was all about, you do this, you don't do this. You know, it was all a matter of everything's like prescribed, social norms, ideals, all that sort of stuff. So people had a higher rate of self-regulation, but then when it came to insight and self-awareness, that was that was lacking. That was completely lacking. That's why psychotherapy worked so well back in those days, because when they got that self-awareness back, you know, oh, this is what it relates back to. They jumped on it and they're like, oh, that's awesome. You know, now I know what's going on. And then they arranged their life in such a way that they could regulate themselves in a better version of who they were. So kind of therapy did a really good job at that point in time. These days, it appears that we achieve that regulation, that awareness rather, a lot quicker. But because our culture doesn't seem to value self-regulation, self-control, everything's at clickbaits and likes and shares and all that sort of stuff at the click of the finger. We find it a lot more difficult to regulate our behavior in light of that. Have you found that any of this sort of any of these considerations factor into the way that you approach the issue, the problem, what someone's coming into you? Performing arts is all about being able to provide an outlet for many people. As far as I mean, a novice, you're kind of observing it. It's like you put on a song when you want to just get out of there, or watch a movie, or do that sort of stuff. So what's your opinion on what I've said? I know I've just chatted it for quite a long time. So
No. I hear you. I think the world has shifted very much so to a place where it's about surrendering to your urge. And it's very much about instant gratification, and it's very much around being reactive. And so that's a difficult programming to break away from. If that's what you're exposed to every day, if that's what you're used to, if that's the way of the world now, if that's the language with which people operate, it's a very difficult program to break away from. And so I guess what we do with that is we try to re-empower a person to press pause, to take a beat, to consider, to reflect, to respond rather than react. Because giving yourself that time, giving yourself that moment, giving yourself that opportunity to really choose what it is that you want to do next is where true power comes from. And so, I think, it takes a bit of work to get there, because it's so easy to just go. It's so easy to just do. It's so easy to just throw it out there. But, we want our choices and our behaviors to be somewhat considered for our own health and well-being, along with everybody else's.
Kind of putting that space between the urge and the action.
Yeah.
You mentioned the imposter syndrome. Now, so many people, when they're doing something that they don't feel like they're proficient at, or when they're in a position where they're in a high level position, they feel like they are not quite up to scratch. Experience from, oh, well, what the hell am I doing? I don't feel confident. I don't feel as if I'm proficient in my job, just to use that word again. Tell me a little bit about your experience with this imposter syndrome, so to speak.
Yeah, I think imposter syndrome for me was something that was always there. I mean, not having started dancing until the age of 18, I guess a part of me walked into that community thinking, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. Like, I haven't trained from the age of 3. There are all of these people around me who can kick their leg up to their head and can do like 3 or 4 turns. And I don't know what a pirouette was. For me, I used to like spin in the kitchen on my socks, so I think it always followed me, this idea that I didn't really belong. I didn't really have the skill or the aptitude, that it takes to be there, or that it takes to stay there. And I guess as work started coming through, I'm sure most of my talk was, did I really deserve this? Am I really capable of this? Should I not be here? Is there someone else who deserves it more? It's only a matter of time until I'm caught out. People are going to notice that I'm a fraud. And I think that followed me for most of my career. I think the place where it spiraled out of control was when I moved from being a dancer into a singing role, not just in an ensemble, but I'm talking a principal singing role in a show. I think that's when my self-talk very much centered around, I don't deserve to be here. There are so many other people who are far better at this than me, and it's only a matter of time until I get called out. So that interrupted a lot of my productivity. It interrupted the joy that I could have and should have experienced from coming out on stage every night as a lead role in The Lion King. It ended up becoming a real demon that I had to grapple with, and I could not have done that without some psychological support and without some psychological tools.
Did other people share any of those opinions of yourself, or was that just an internal thing?
It was definitely an internal thing. And we are very good at masking in this industry. I mean, we are actors. It's what we do. So there's not a single person that would have noticed or picked up on the fact that that's how I was feeling. There's not a single person that would have picked up on the fact that I went home and pretty much cried every night, because I didn't feel like I was up to par. And yet here I was with this incredible responsibility and with a show that had so much legacy to it. I felt completely inadequate. But you would never have known that, because I was very good at turning up to stage door with a smile on my face and pretending that I had everything in check.
And if somebody were to give you some positive feedback, how was that received?
Dismissed it immediately.
Well, what was the internal dialogue like? Was it, you have no idea, or like?
I would brush it off. I wouldn't allow it to sit. I wouldn't allow myself to savor that compliment or to savor that feedback. I would just brush it off. Or I guess, my internal monologue would very much be, how can you say that? I missed this note and I was flat on that note and I forgot that entrance and, I didn't pick up that cue. And so I wouldn't allow for any positive feedback to sit. I wouldn't make room for it because I was so fused to my inadequacy and my lack of self-worth that there wasn't room for anything else.
There is some utility to that, though, isn't there? Because it serves us when we think we're not as good as what we could be, and so we're highlighting all these other things that we suck at and we could get better at, whereas no one else is telling us that. And so we become our own worst critic, but then as an aside to that, we become better at doing what it is that we do. The question is, where's the ceiling? Like, where do we hit that point where we're like, okay, I'm okay now?
I wish that I had learned to stay in my own lane. And that's something that I talk to youth about a lot, is the power of staying in your own lane. That negative self-talk or those intrusive thoughts could have been helpful if my competition was me, if I was wanting to improve against myself. But the reason it was detrimental was because I was comparing myself to everybody else. And so had I stayed in my own lane and gone, okay, cool, you know, like, I'll take that feedback, yeah, and I'll work a little harder, and I'll try to be a little bit more efficient, and I'll try to grow, and I'll try to learn. Thank you very much, voice. Thank you, thought. Thank you, feeling, for pushing me. That would have been great. But instead, what I did is that I took all of that, of what was happening, and I compared myself to everybody else on that stage and everybody else in the industry. And that was a battle I was never going to win.
I like what you said there, because part of therapy, I mean, you would know this about mentoring and coaching and doing therapy with people who just want to improve themselves, get that bit better. My recourse is always, are you 1% better today than what you were yesterday? It's like, even if you do one push-up, that's one more than none. You know, there's a saying that you know, it doesn't matter how slow you're doing, you're still doing laps you're still doing laps over anyone on the couch. You know, this is the thing. It's kind of like, how do you push yourself to a point where you're kind of like, I'm going to compare myself to myself rather than the other person in the room? I have to ask, did you meet many narcissists in the performing arts, in the performing industries?
I think there's a little bit of that in all of us, to be honest with you. You know, we're all seeking. Think about what we do. We get up on stage and we're seeking validation. We get up on stage and we're seeking praise. We get up on stage and we're seeking respect and appraisal and you know, appreciation and love. You know, I think there's a little bit of a narcissist in all of us. You know, our ego is at stake. You know, we are vulnerable. So therefore we try to protect ourselves. You know, we do what we can to stay on top. We do what we can to one up, because I guess the cost of vulnerability in an arena like that is terrifying. So, you know, there's a little bit of a narcissist in all of us, because in some ways we're all a little damaged, and we're all trying to seek a little bit of repair, and we're using our art in order to be able to do that.
I guess the reason I asked that question is because when it comes to narcissism, often you have a person with a higher level of esteem for oneself, and so they either overblow their own personal value or their own personal worth, but they may actually be really good at what it is that they're doing, but they may, on the other hand, be very susceptible to negative feedback. And so I guess the question there would be, when a person thinks very highly of themselves, are they willing to push themselves to improve, or are they working at a different level of I can't remember. I'm not sure what word to use there. A little of confidence, so to speak. I don't know. It's not even a confidence. It's self-assuredness almost. This is the way that I am. And
yeah, but it's a protective factor. You know, that confidence, that self-assurance is a protective factor for the vulnerability that person is actually going through.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's why when you sort of brought up the question, are there lots of narcissists in our industry? I'm not thinking, and maybe this is because I am a therapist, I'm not thinking about the people with an overinflated ego or an overinflated sense of self. I'm thinking about the people who are masking their vulnerability, you know, and who are trying to compensate for it. And that's why my answer was like, well, yes, we all are that to some extent. There's a little bit of that in all of us to some extent, because, I don't know, I guess, you know, if self-acceptance was something that we had mastered, I don't know that we would seek what we seek through our art form. I don't know that we would continue to do that as much as we do.
I like that. I think that's a wonderful place to wind up, actually, Will. Thank you so much. That was really good. There's so much more that we can talk about, and we didn't even get into where we can find you and that sort of stuff. But what I would say is, if people did want to get to know you a little bit more, or reach out to you, ask you a few questions, or just get involved with the kind of work that you do, can you give us a bit of an insight into where to find you, what it is that you do, how to get into contact with the socials and website and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so social media is probably the best place to track my work, see the kinds of different people that I work with, different schools, dance studios, institutions, professional shows, organizations, associations, and whatnot. So you can find me on @MrWillCenturion via Instagram, or otherwise you can check out my website, www.mrwillcenturion.com.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Will. I look forward to keeping in contact. And guys, if you want more information, visit those websites and reach out to Will. It's been a fascinating and really engrossing conversation today. And I wish you the very best.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.